All right, let's talk about Node.js and Express. So typically, when you think about JavaScript, you typically think of JavaScript being executed on the browser, right, as a language that is interpreted and runs on the browser, and then the browser uses this language to be able to dynamically interact with the browser, generate dynamic DOM content, delete it, update it, and so on and so forth. Perhaps make dynamic queries to remote services, and use the data in JSON to dynamically then render an API. Well, JavaScript can not just be executed on the browser; it can also be executed on the console, right, on a desktop. And Node.js is exactly a tool, a framework that allows us to do just that, right? Just give it some JavaScript and execute it from the command line. So what's the big deal? Well, there's a lot of things that JavaScript can't do because it might be running on a browser, right? It's confined to the browser cannot access the local file system. It cannot make queries to any HTTP requests. It might it's forced to either go back to only the original domain that it came from, or only those that would allow cross-domain queries. It also doesn't have access to a database or to store or to maintain state. So there's a lot of things that are not allowed, or are restrictions that we impose on JavaScript running on a browser. Nevertheless, it has pros for it, right? It can render things dynamically on the content. It has a user interface. It can receive user input. It can all sorts of really cool things. So Node.js allows us kind of provide the other side of that we're missing on the JavaScript on the browser. Node.js allows us to implement almost the mirror image or the negative of what you can do in the browser. In Node.js, you can write a JavaScript that can access databases, right? Has full access to the file system, has full access to the network. It can call anyone it wants, but it does not have a user interface, right? Doesn't typically has any. There is no DOM, there is no window, there is no user interface. There's no mouse, there's no color, there's nothing, none of that. So in that respect, they kind of complement each other. So if we could make them work together, that makes a very powerful combination, right? So we're going to be using Node.js as the middle tier in a stack, usually referred to as the mean stack. Mean as in being the acronyms of the four major parts or pieces of technology that are used to implement these types of applications. We have M for the MongoDB, where we're going to persist documents in collections, more or less like tables and records and whatnot. There's the E for Express. Express being a module, a very, very popular Node.js module that provides a middle tier framework, right, to be able to respond to HTTP GET, POST, PUT, and create RESTful web services. The A for Angular, which we talked about last week, right, the user interface framework, and the N for the Node.js middle tier framework, where we're going to implement servers built on top of Express, and is going to provide also the glue between the URLs and the requests coming from the client, and gluing it to updates and modifications to some data model implemented in MongoDB. So today we're going to focus on Node.js and how is it that we would implement at least up to this part, the Node.js and the Express services. Next week when we come back, we'll focus more on the data model, Mongoose, and connecting to a database. So Node.js, where's Node.js? If you go to nodejs.org, you can download it from there. The latest version is 11 for your particular infrastructure, for Mac or PC, whatnot. So download it, install it. you'll get, in a bin directory, you'll get quite a few executables, of which 2 of them are of interest to us in particular. One of them is npm, which we've been using all along, right? For a couple of months, we've been using npm, but we never really talked about what it really is, right? It stands for a Node Package Manager. So all these Angular and React applications that we've been building so far have all been built on top of Node. So we've been using Node all along, but not explicitly. We haven't done anything explicitly with it. We've used frameworks that build things on top of Node, but we haven't done any of it ourselves. So npm is a Node package manager. It allows us to install libraries, update libraries, and also run executables and run commands. One in particular is the npm init. npm init allows you to initialize a brand new project. This is how all projects have started. All the Angular project, the React project, all these started as an npm init, right? And they packaged their products, right? And then they uploaded it to the npm repository, the npm repository. I think it's npm.org, is it? Oh, is it npmjs.org? There it is. So this is the repository that folks, after having initialized and compiled and packaged their Node packages, right? They make it available as a source, open source, for the rest of the community to do an npm install whenever they need it, right? Which is pretty cool. So it'd be nice to see some of your packages sometime here. So this is where they all start. And then you can then install additional components. For instance, we've used this before to install the Angular CLI, right? To install the create React app. We've done this already. So we're going to use it today to build from scratch one of these components, right? So let's do that. Let's see. Let's head over to Let's go down to webdev, and let's go to 2018, and let's go down to fall. And in here, we'll create a directory that we're going to be using to implement a middle tier, a server, right, implemented using Node.js. We already have a server implemented using Spring Java, right? In this case, we're going to create one using Node.js instead, right? So we'll create a directory. We'll call it whiteboard, and we'll call it fall 2018. This will be the server, but it will be a Node server. Okay? So let's do that, and let's go in there. Did I just spell it or misspell it again? I'll call it whiteboard F 2018 server. Did I misspell it? 2-8. Oh, jeez. Just checking if you were awake, that's all. So whiteboard. Indeed, server. Okay, excellent. So we're in there. So we're going to do a make npm init. And this is just going to go through a couple of questions on who the author is and my contact information, if it's on GitHub, if it's some dependencies that you might want to know. So it's asking me, is that the package name that you want? Any versioning, description, entry point, test commands, Git repo, any keywords, me. License, is this okay? And what it does, it just generates for us this package.json file, right? And this package.json file is somewhat the equivalent to the POM file that we were using on the Java project, right? They describe the project, right? Also, any dependencies that this particular project might have with other projects, or dependencies with other libraries that it would need for this to run, would be listed here. Right now, there are no dependencies. It just says who the author is. And this directory is what you would submit to npm if anybody wants to do an npm install. Somebody else would, if you submit this to npm, somebody would type npm install whiteboard 2018 server node, right? And then your library would be installed in their node underscore modules. Okay, we'll see node underscore modules in a minute. All right, so let's install our first dependency. So what we want to do is create a server, and Express is a library that allows us to create servers in 1 or 2 lines of code. It's a nice library that makes it very, very easy to create HTTP servers. Right, so that's going to install it. Notice that it says npm install Express. So the name of the library that I'm installing is Express, and notice that I'm putting right next to it -- save. What that does is that it makes an entry into my package JSON stating that Express is a dependency now, meaning my project can't run unless it has Express installed. Right? So if we see now, if we go into our node modules, right, Express is there. Right? There's a new directory in there. So my installation created the node underscore modules. These are all the libraries that I need for my project to run, including Express. Express is dependent on other projects. So what npm does, it walks the dependency tree, right, and downloads all the libraries that it needs and lists and creates them there. And it also makes an entry into the package JSON, now stating that Express is a dependency of this project. Right, so now, if somebody wanted to use your project, they would type npm install. Npm install without an argument reads your package JSON, looks at all the dependencies, and it goes and fetches all those dependencies and installs them in node underscore modules. Right. So if it's not listed in package JSON, somebody would not be able to run your application. Right. It would fail. Right. And that's one of the first things that's going to happen when I ask you to deploy this to Heroku, and says, why is it working locally but not remotely when you push it to Heroku? It's probably because you forgot the -- save. You forgot the -- save. So now your dependencies are not listed in package JSON. When Heroku sees it, it runs npm install. It does not get installed because it's not listed as a dependency, and then your application fails. So the first thing that I'll answer to you is make sure that you reinstall everything using -- save. All right, excellent. What else? So let's create our very first hello world server. So let's do that. Let's do a touch server.js. So this creates a file. It's an empty file. There's nothing in it. Actually, let's open it up with our favorite IDE. So let's close this. And let's open. And let's go into webdev 2018 fall. And where is it? Node. Is that it? I think that's it, right? Yeah. And there's our server.js, and there's nothing in it. We haven't put anything there yet. And let's create our very first, very simple server in there. Let's create here. Let's copy this. First, we're going to require Express. Require is the equivalent of an import or an include, right? And what it'll do, this Express, presumably it'll be found in node underscore modules. Require searches the current directory to find anything that we put in these quotations. It's pretty smart. Depending on what you tell it, it'll walk the tree until it finds the package for you. Right? If you don't say anything in front of this, like a dot and a slash, it'll interpret it as being inside of the node underscore modules. Right? It'll find it in there. Right? So that's going to load it. And here we have a reference to it. And now that we have that, we can instantiate it. What this returns is a function that we can treat it as a constructor, right? That executes and it returns an object, right? That we can then that object has certain attributes, certain properties, certain functions that we can then call on this variable that comes back on this app over here. One of the functions is that one of the functions for the app that is returned by Express, one of the functions is the get function. Right, the get function is the equivalent of doing an @get mapping in Java. Remember what that did? Right? It mapped a URL to a function. Remember that? Right? So that you can hit that URL and then that function would execute. Right? In Java. Remember doing that? Same thing. App.get is that function. Obviously the syntax is different, but the concept is identical. Right? You put a URL and you put a function. Okay? Or you put a function here, do something, the name of a function, and then declare the function down here. Okay? All right. But it's the same idea. So let's do our very first one, very simple one. Let's do a hello world. So this will be maybe /hello. Okay, and the function will be all the functions. Any function that you put in here needs to take 2 arguments. Okay? In Java, we did that by injection or by asking arguments in the parameters, right? Here's it's a little bit less sophisticated. This is fairly, I guess, simpler, I would say. All these functions need to take 2 arguments. The first argument will always be mapped to the incoming request from the HTTP request that is arriving to the server. The second argument is an object that is mapped to the response that your function could make back to the client, right? Which allows you to participate in the client-server relationship here, right? The client is sending you something, and then you respond, right? In Java, it was a little bit slightly different, right? You had the URL, you had maybe parameters and whatnot, and then somehow they were mapped to the parameters, right? The incoming parameter. You had @request param or param vars or whatever, right? Or HTTP body, things like that. Request body. Here again, it's a little bit less sophisticated, but it's the same idea. The request object contains everything that is coming from the client. The timestamp when this was generated, any cookies, any path parameters, any query string, the IP address where this is coming from. Everything is inside of the get, of the request. The response allows you to respond, send back data, either as a string, as JSON, as whatever. Okay. All right. So these are the parameters of a function, and this is going to be the response. All right, so notice that this is a function that is embedded in here. So I'm calling it right away. So it's an anonymous function, like a callback function, right? And we're going to say we're just going to respond. We're going to send back just hello world. Okay. All right. So there we go. We have our very first. Okay. So it doesn't like my syntax. Let me see if I can change preferences, languages, JavaScript. I'll say 6. I'll say OK. OK, so now it's happy. All right, so we have that. We can now start our HTTP server and say that, hey, app, start listening at port 3000 for incoming HTTP requests. OK? That's it. That's it. That's our server in 3-4 lines of code. We can now start our server. We can say node and get a server started. It's up and running. It's blocked here, waiting for incoming requests at port 3000. So let's do that. We can say localhost 3000 and say hello, right? And it comes back with hello world. Everybody okay? Right? Okay, so let's